Good evening. I see more people piling in, which is great. My name is Dorian Chung. I'm Deputy Director for Curatorial and Chief Curator at M+. Gives me a great pleasure to open tonight's event, which is the first of a series of public programs and activities that we are organizing in relation to the solo presentation by Shirley Tse representing Hong Kong at the upcoming Venice Biennale, titled Shirley Tse Stakeholders, Hong Kong in Venice. I will leave the more detailed introduction on Shirley to the curator of the exhibition, who will come up next. But I'm here to, among other things, to acknowledge Hong Kong Arts Development Council, our longtime lovely partner for collaboration on this really meaningful project for the art community here in Hong Kong. Just to refresh everybody's memory, the current project is the fourth iteration where ADC and M+ are collaborating. We're co-commissioning, co-presenting, and we have been given the great privilege of curating the exhibition. With each iteration, we have been really trying to think hard about how we can further and further contribute to the rapidly growing and maturing community of contemporary art practitioners here in Hong Kong. So what we did in the last edition for 2017 Venice Biennale, we introduced the scheme of inviting a guest curator. So in that instance, Kwok Ing, working with the artist Samson Young. And this time we continue that tradition, but with slight modification, and selected Christina Lee as the guest curator, who in turn selected Shirley Tse to be the artist representing Hong Kong. It is also a sign of the growth that I was just talking about, in the sense that Shirley, who's hailing from Hong Kong originally, has been a long time resident of Los Angeles. She's well known as not only artist, but as a very well-respected educator. And it's really an indication that Hong Kong contemporary art is not bound by the geographical boundaries. So really proud of making that contribution. So as I mentioned, this is just the first of a number of events that we're organizing in relation to the exhibition, which will open to the public in Venice on May 11th, running for more than 6 months until late November. For those of you who will have a chance to see the exhibition, as well as for those who will not have a chance to see the exhibition in Venice, you will get to see the return exhibition, as we always do. And we are currently planning to present the return exhibition of that solo presentation at the M+ Pavilion in mid-2020. So this will be a long-term engagement. This will be a repeated engagement. And we're really privileged to have that with Christina as a curator and Shirley as the artist. So following the opening in May in Venice, then, as I said, there will be a further series of events that will be happening roughly around the summertime. So I think that's enough of the information for introduction. So to the main part of the show, I'm going to ask Christina to come up to introduce Shirley and tonight's talk. Thank you very much.
Well, well, thank you, Dorian, and good evening, everybody. I'm so pleased to see so many of you here tonight. It's such a unique opportunity for us all here, as we believe that it's really important to reintroduce Shirley Tse's practice here in Hong Kong. It's her first homecoming event leading up to the Venice Biennale presentation in Venice in May. I'm just going to spend some time to give some biographical information and then explain a little bit the structure of the talk tonight. Well, over the past 2 decades, Los Angeles-based Hong Kong artist and art educator Shirley Tse has addressed the various meanings and possible interpretations of materials and things. Shirley's practice spans across mediums such as sculpture, installation, photography, and text. Her practice has evolved from considering plastics as a prime signifier of globalization through circulation, standardization, and industrialization to examining plastic as an adjective as well, and the resonance of plasticity, movement, and multiplicity in contemporary society. She at once deconstructs the world of synthetic objects that carry paradoxical meanings and constructs models in which differences might come together. To visualize heterogeneity, Shirley conflates different scales, fuses the organic with the industrial, moves between the literal and the metaphorical, merges narratives, and collapses the subject and object relationship. Well, with her formative experience in Hong Kong, Shirley graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree from Chinese University's Fine Arts Department before moving to the US and obtained a Master of Fine Arts degree from Art Center College of Design in Pasadena. Shirley's works have been exhibited widely internationally in Hong Kong, including venues such as Pasadena Museum of Californian Art, Osage Hong Kong, Parasite Hong Kong, the Sydney Biennale, MoMA PS1, New Museum, and the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, etc., etc. And her work is featured in many articles, catalogs, and other publications, including Academy X, Lessons in Art and Life, and Sculpture Today. Tse received the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation Fellowship in 2009 and has been the faculty at California Institute of Arts since 2001, where she is the Robert Fitzpatrick Chair in the Arts. So I want to share a little bit of practicalities before we have Shirley on stage to really tell us what she's been working with in the past 20 years. Tonight the talk would be bilingual and with simultaneous translation provided. You can get a headset if you haven't had one already, and you can also test if it works and to make sure everything's fine. Shirley will first give a 1-hour presentation in English to be followed with a brief conversation with me where she would share some ideas on her project in Venice coming up. And if we have enough time, we will take a couple of questions from the audience in English or in Cantonese. Well, on this note, I would like to invite Shirley Tse to come on stage, and please give her a round of applause, please.
Thank you, Christina, for the introduction. And I'm so delighted to have this opportunity to share my practice with you. And I want to let you know that I'm going to talk a lot in the first few slides and to give you an outline of my thinking process. And then we're going to move the slide fairly quickly after that. And this is the title page. I think in the event, we only have the first 2 lines and actually we have the first line and the third line, but there are more. There's always more to the story. So this title page describes how my work moves and shifts in the last 20 years, or last 20 plus years. And this list indeed can go on. For example, from abstract to figurative, from the general to the personal. But we're going to stick with this for now. The shift I'm talking about is a shift of emphasis. So all of these 8 words you see here are present at all times. So you see, language can be so linear, sometimes that is misleading. It's as if I'm moving from point A to point B and leaving point A totally behind. No, that's not what I'm talking about. In fact, it's more like a sound mixer with fader knobs. So, you know, like the song's still there, but then if you turn knobs from up to down, then you might hear the bass more, the treble more. So the same thing here. You can see plastic, plasticity, polymer, polysemy, multiplicity, negotiation, philosophy, economics. It's always already there. But in the last 20 years, I kind of freely shift between the 2 points. So I'm using plastic as both as a noun, as an object, a material, and also an adjective from day one and to this day as well. And it's just that I shifted the emphasis from a material to a state of fluidity and paradoxes. And polymer. In chemistry, plastic is referred to as synthetic polymer. There's also organic polymer as well. So, but plastic is referred to as synthetic polymer. And polysemy is a linguistic term that means multiple meanings. Multiplicity describes a state of differences within a certain thing, and negotiation put the emphasis in the action of each entity within such a thing. So you see that, that's the difference. And you see, I'm using the term negotiation in a philosophical way. And it's not limited to its normal usage in business or politics. I also use negotiation in a spatial sense, as a spatial negotiation, as in a body moving through space. So that's actually really important, the way that I'm using negotiation as well. And now, so that's sort of like the more philosophical usage of the word negotiation. Now, economics. I don't mean by economics, I don't mean the managing of finances, because money is just one form of many possible economic systems. I mean economics in a more fundamental sense, as in economic science, the study of formal systems that describe the relations between resources within a society, the understanding of how a dynamic function, how power fluctuated within an equilibrium, how to translate between different modes, and articulation of the concept of exchange in terms that are not monetary. So that's sort of lay out the main concept of the practice that I've been having in the last 20 years. And finally, moving to the artwork. So, you know what, plastic? Surprise, this is not plastic, it's metal. So what's going on? I'm been known to be the artist who use plastic and use it exclusively for over a decade. But it really was mass production, the factory made, standardization that I was drawn to. And in my art, I play with the resistance to such standardization, uniformity, by introducing differences. So this is actually a really good example to show you why I chose plastic, because of the idea of addressing standardization and uniformity. So this is a piece that I did in 1995. And in LA, in Los Angeles, there is a store called Home Depot. It's sort of like the IKEA version of a hardware store. So it's a giant mega store where you can buy all sort of parts so that you can put your bathroom together or put your kitchen together. And you know, just like IKEA, when you put a table together, maybe you feel a sense of accomplishment. So the same thing with Home Depot. You can get stuff and build your own, you know, bathroom. And you might even feel like you even though you are buying the parts together and putting it together and following instruction, you might feel like you actually built it. So, and I thought I will buy a kit to put some brass railing. This is made of brass together, but I'm not going to follow the instruction. I knew that I'm going to mess it up. I would bring in brass part from even maybe another object and sort of combine them. But in order to mess it up, I need to learn how to cut, bend, And brace is a form of welding for brass, but it's bracing in order for me to change the shape of all the parts. So this is what you have now. So in the end, I have, under the same line, you can see these differences that is not predetermined. It's not determined by the factory or the company. I made up. And I can show you detail. One of the part is actually a chain, and it's kind of ridiculous to have a chain, and so it stopped to even function as a support. And that's kind of like an example of how I try to put all the differences under the same roof, so to speak. And then we now up to a piece that is done around the same year. So you can see that even from the very beginning, I was using different material before I move on to using plastic exclusively. So in the back of Home Depot, those supersized store, there's often a row of dumpsters. In the 90s, those dumpsters were filled with packaging styrofoam. And I began my dumpster diving days by salvaging those styrofoam and use them as artwork. And those curious objects are full of paradoxes to my eyes. Because if you look at those styrofoam, they really are trash, but then they're brand new. They're so clean. And it's permanent in substance, so it does not biodegrade, but temporal in use. It's ubiquitous, but otherworldly. And they are light, yet strong. And they're both surface and structure at once. So I really am interested in all this, kind of like this material is occupying all these multiple sites at once. And this piece, what you're seeing now, is made of those found styrofoam, which I painstakingly upholster them. So what I'm talking about, maybe I should show you some. Here's another view. They're kind of stacked together, but they are, this is in detail. So what happened is I would take a block of styrofoam, I would trace all the facets of the styrofoam, and transfer it into vinyl sheet, as in, this is like a beige color vinyl sheet, as those vinyl that you use as a tablecloth. And then cut them out, and you spray adhesive and put it back. So I would even cover the, wonder if this cursor works. Yeah, so I would even cover the negative side inside the hole as well. So it's rather labor intensive. And the reason I do that, because when I was looking at those styrofoam, I was like, this is really curious, because if you look at them, you might think that all this negative shape must be the negative for the positive of those electronic appliances, like a TV or a computer or whatnot. But then, if you study them closely, then you, I'm gonna go back to, this one. So if you study them closely, you might notice that there are space, like this hole here. They don't really fit into anywhere for the computer or the TV. And so I started doing some research and talked to actually Hewlett Packard, and I managed to find out that what happened is you're talking about a kind of mass-produced object here. This is like it's done in large quantities. So with a solid corner, you don't really need a solid corner, because if you hollow it, it's going to save a lot of money in terms of a mass-produced thing. And then for this little protrusion here, you can see this at the very back, directly underneath that protrusion is some cavity. So it's sort of like the male and female form. And they don't really fit anywhere into the computer or your TV or whatnot either. So the designer told me that they're actually for the block to be linked up to each other for ease of transport. So when you think about it, I'm really curious in how the final outcome of this form is the convergence of multiple reasons. It doesn't come from a single source. It comes from a functional reason to indeed to be the negative shape or the positive of those electronic appliances. But then there's an economic reason, and then there's a transportational reason. And at that time, I was really interested in, this is done maybe right at the time when I was about to finish graduate school. So I was really interested in subjectivity and how an artist made aesthetic decision. And when an artist makes aesthetic decision, can they truly say that it's their own or is come from somewhere else? So looking at these products of industrial design, it kind of gave me the inspiration that I believe, for me, subjectivity is never singular. So it's always somehow a mixture of multiple things. You might think that this idea comes from you, but it might be, it comes from a combination of something else, and then it become part of you. So I'm really interested in this sort of convergence of different sources. And, here. So I'm interested in the paradox and the multiplicity of the styrofoam, but then I'm also looking at these objects in our world is used for packaging, as well as other kind of plastic like bubble wrap. And I think both styrofoam and bubble wrap is the prime signifier of the 20th century. Because when you think about it, the 20th century is essentially about movement, be it in movement of people, as in migration, and I am one of them, and also the movement of goods, as in trading. So when you think of it, plastic is really the residue of that movement. It's the forgotten space in between, the sort of interstitial space between that. And I started researching into the history of plastic, and I discovered that it's a portal to understanding American major industry history, military history, modern medicine, synthetic garments, as in polyester, industrial design, material science, aerospace technology, environmental pollution, waste management, petroleum trade, geopolitics, and a myriad of many, many things. And then it's quite curious to me that a single substance can span such heterogeneous field and form so many connections. Plastic was a utopian substance right after the war in the 50s. It's like, like a better living through chemistry was the logo from DuPont, for example. But within the 20 years, by the 70s, it's completely becoming a dystopian thing because of our awareness of the environmental disaster that it can create. Of course, the fact that it's non-biodegradable makes it dystopian. But to me, our consumption pattern, the single use, our culture of convenience is by far more of a culprit than the material alone. Because when you really look at the material, and then I was starting to study the chemistry of all these different polymers. And then it dawned on me one day that plastic, so to speak, is not even a substance. It's a formula. Really just a formula. It's a code or a syntax. Chemists were able to code small organic molecules, mostly carbon, to form enormous chain. So what makes plastic plastic is actually the structure of it, the syntax of it, the organization of it. It's the synthetic action that is plastic. So it's really not a thing when you really think about it. It's a code. So without fixed identity, yet it engenders sites of conflict and ethical debate. So now, depending on where you stand, you might see plastic differently. You've been looking at this image of the Kwai Chung container terminal for a long time now. So this image was indeed used in one of my art pieces that I did in 1996, which is now known as the genre lecture performance. I presented a paper with slide images for this thing called a Chance Conference, put together by the writer Chris Kraus. Because the name of the conference is called Chance, Chris thought that what was more fitting than having this conference, instead of having it in an academic place, we'll have it at a casino and have Jean Baudrillard at the keynote. Because I have written a thesis on plastic as simulacra, so she thinks that I should contribute to the conference. So the next thing we know is she rented an auditorium at Whiskey Pete's Casino in Nevada in State Line, where philosopher, poet, gender theorist, Buto dancers, stockbroker, using chaos theory, delivering the paper on stage. There were a full bar at the very back. I wish there's one right now, but we don't have it. So some dubbed it a philosophical wave. So my contribution was a paper titled Post-Colonial Mutation and Artificiality. So I talk about the paradox of plastic and the fact that it's kind of occupy multiple sites at once. And I was actually using Hong Kong as a case study, and that's why this slide showed up. So what happened was I was on stage, I wore a wig, I was outfitted with lots of shiny plastic, and show images of documentation of my other performance. So here's a snippet from the essay. An incident in 1992 gives us the perfect example of the paradox of artificiality. A freak ocean storm washed a container off a freighter in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, releasing 29,000 plastic baths of toys being shipped from Hong Kong to Tacoma, Washington. Over the next year, thousands of blue turtles, red beavers, yellow duck, and green frogs wash up on the Alaska coast, giving oceanographers a great deal of data on North Pacific winds and current. The marine research community dubbed this incident, quote, the quack heard round the world, end quote, and used it to update the computer models of the ocean. By the way, the slide is only a simulation of the actual situation. So this is at the Santa Monica Bay. So, and I didn't live in the ocean. I picked them up. So don't worry, no trash. So the question I want to ask as part of my paper is that, was it a violation of natural Alaskan beauty by the efforts of our industry? Is this a boon to scientific knowledge because we have new model for understanding ocean current? Or does it represent another rush order, creating much needed jobs and overtime for Hong Kong factory workers? Because my mom has worked with these toys once. So as a piecework from the factory from Kwai Chung. So Hong Kong is make plastic by other industrialized power, but then in turn bombard the West with an uncontrollable wave of plastic, washing ashore to enrich inner city slum and minority neighborhoods, ending up as boilerless piles of factory excess. So now, depending on where you stand, you might see plastic differently. It's a site of competing ideology. And after doing the performance and the image of this plastic object in nature was very striking to me. So I decided to actually make my own sculpture and put them in landscape. So this is the beginning of my photographic series where I will create sculpture made of polymer and then we'll place them in physical landscape. And the thing is that I will never show the actual sculpture, so you will never know the scale of the piece. And this is from a series called Not Exactly a ... from '98, and I'm just gonna skip through them in the interest of time. And the next installation is called Polymethic Styrene, and we're now up to the year 2000. And polymethic styrene is I like to mix kind of just made it up title. And it's a combination of the word polystyrene, which is styrofoam, and polymath. A polymath is someone who have encyclopedic knowledge. So sort of like a Renaissance person. And so what you see here is an installation shot of this piece, and it's quite large. It's about 200 linear feet, and it has about maybe 38 panels with different length. They all have the same. They all have the same width, length. In one dimension, but the other dimension is where it does vary, and they have different thickness as well. So, and here's another installation shot. So install at waist height. So when you come into the room, you only see one line, so you can't really see the whole piece. And that's really important to me because I want to make this sculpture in a way that you cannot be consumed by one single gaze. So what you must do is to use your body and move around in the space and look at all the different panels. And then your experience of the sculpture will be a composite of your memory, so to speak. So in a way, it's kind of cinematic, and then you see some details going on. Here's another view of the installation. And then I don't know if you can see at the, this is installed in the biggest space of the gallery where it's connected to a smaller space on the other side. And in fact, I have the sculpture blocking the doorway that goes between the big space and the small space. So there's another door in the smaller space so that you have to go around to go to the other side. And it's done, this is polystyrene, styrofoam, and it's done using a handheld router. So it's done by hand. There's no CNC machine involved. A lot of people thought it was CNC, but it's not. And it's done using just, a basic woodworking tool router using also jigs. So I created special jigs for them. And I sort of have a mental checklist of what sort of form I want to carve, but from the beginning. But there was no blueprint from day one what the form are gonna be. So I just have some sort of checklist of I need to cover all as many aesthetic as possible under one roof. So for example, you can see some area where it's kind of abstract. There's some more representational as if this is a landscape. And some of the landscape look like it's sort of futuristic, and other looks like ancient ruins. And here is another representational image that is actually almost like a 2D drawing, so more shallow, and then it's kind of referencing bubble wrap as well. And then here is a panel that I carved right after a visit to Legoland. And where I was in Legoland in San Diego, and then I was kind of marveled by the way that how they use Lego blocks to create a facade of Albert Einstein. So there's no mistaking that was Albert Einstein, but then when you stand really close, it's totally abstract. And so in a way, the piece, because I didn't have a predetermined plan of what they are, so it ended up being like a visual diary as well. So it took 2 years, maybe more, 2 years plus for me to make this piece. And then if you look at the support, some of them are Baroque and some of them are very modern. And from the same panel, because it's kind of a circle formation, depending whether you're going to move from the right or to the left or left to the right, it could be going from chaos to order or vice versa. And then now, this is going to repeat throughout the whole, my practice in the last 20 years. I always have some sort of self-referentiality to my sculpture so that there's no mystery to the making of the work. So this panel shows you a collection of all the router bits I have at one point. So, but since then I have even more. So I need to add another panel. And what I like, why I choose to do this, because remember the styrofoam block before? That convergence of things. So in this case, I really like the fact that I'm using my hand and a router, multiple router bits, and these router bits are a manufactured product because a router bits only comes in a 1/4 inch or, half an inch or whatnot. They have a certain, standardized shape to make crown molding for buildings and whatnot. So I really like that this piece is done as a negotiation between my hand, a machine, and some premeditated form, like, those checklists that I have, abstract, representation, 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional. And here's an installation shot of how this is actually installed in a different space. So it is also, the sculpture is also flexible. It doesn't need to be in that size. So it could fit in a different room, maybe a little smaller and so forth. And then here's just a shot of it from the smaller room, how it blocked the entrance. And then also you see another collection of photographic images that I done. It's called Diaspora Churistry. And I'm going to just show you the image and skip to the next work. So the next installation is called Shelf Life. It's commissioned by Cap Street Project in San Francisco. It's 2002. And after that first piece, the previous piece where I was using the viewer body as a way to engage the sculpture in a kind of temporal way, the walking, the movement. In this piece, I want to play with the subject-object relationship again. In fact, I want to make a sculpture so big that, and then it is also going to block the entrance so big that the only way for you to experiencing it is to be in it. So I literally make this styrofoam sculpture as sort of an island, and it blocked the entrance of the gallery. And then there's some steps that carve onto it. So you will have to climb on top, and then you'll see there's some depressions that is filled with a vacuum form. And actually, the overall form of this, maybe there's another installation shot later on. The overall form is actually a blown up image from polymetric styrene. So I just take a small section from the blue piece you see, and then I blow it up to this scale. So that's like a shift of scale. And you're welcome to sit in there. This looks like a jacuzzi, but it's actually, you know how you buy like plastic toys and they come in this sort of clear plastic clamshells? So that is an image of one of those packaging for toys. And then there's memory foam where you can walk on it, and it will retain the impressions of your foot for like a long minute before revert it back. And here's an installation shot of the piece. And when I first was given the site, and I noticed that the ceiling of the space is covered by insulation foam. And then I was like, oh my God, the piece already halfly done. All I need to do, because in this piece I really want to, instead of packaging, what I forgot to say, polymetric styrene is not packaging consumer goods anymore. It was packaging my philosophical idea of multiplicities, right? So, and in this case, I want to package viewers' body and movement. And so all I need to do, if I want to sandwich them, is to build this sculpture about 5 feet tall and raise them up to the ceiling, so then they will be sandwiched. And see, this is what happened. And so here is another view of viewer participation. And then kids really like it. And now, back to the idea of the negotiation between the hand and the machine. Again, at that point, I'm really interested in subjectivity that's not purely my own. And I was moving on beyond the idea of art as a model for expression only. I want to engage with other ideas. So as you see, I was not using, I kind of give myself some rules. So when I'm not using my hand and pencil or paintbrush to make any mark. So any gesture I make need to be mediated through some manufactured item. So in this case, I was asked to make some drawing for an art fair. I was like, okay, I don't really make drawing, so what should I do? But I can use correction tape. Do you guys know, some of the younger ones in here, do you even know what correction tape is? You know, maybe before the time when we use typewriter instead of computer, you know, if you make a mistake, you use like correction for it. But then they came up with, and then it's kind of messy, so they come up with this product called correction tape where you can use it over mistake you made. And those correction tape comes in, again, you know, I don't know, this is like a 1/4 inch or, you know, 3/8 or something. So they all have standardized sizes. So when I make a drawing of a basket, a woven basket, then I can use, you know, different sizes. And, you know, when you go to the supermarket, they ask you paper or plastic. Actually, this is like from 2001 or something. So, but does it really make a difference? Both of them are equally questionable. But anyway, you see, this is an image done in a kind of drawing form for woven basket, but at the same time, it's literally woven with a physical material. So even though this is a drawing, it's also a sculpture at the same time. So that's really important to the work itself. So I did a series of them. You can't really see, but that's kind of how it's. And then I also used this method to make words drawings. So you need to read it really quickly because I'm not going to tell you what it is. And then next installation I want to share with you is called Power Towers in 2004. And it's made of a series of sculpture that is based on actual power towers in our world, like through different periods. So I did some research. And it's made of HDPE, high density polyethylene. And I buy them, you know, it's actually, you know that material because in the kitchen, sometimes you have chopping board, that white plastic chopping board. I bought them in sheet and I cut them into bars and then I put them together using screws and then you can see the details how usually when you cover a screw, you use wood putty, you know, as the case in wood. But in this case, because it's plastic, I use silly putty instead of wood putty. And then you can see that it's even oozing out of the screw holes. And they're all connected with this sort of plastic line through this kind of curious looking hub, I call. And then you can see this sort of egg shape is where silly putty comes from. You know, they're packaging it in an egg shape. And here is the invitation card for the show. It comes in a postcard, I mailed them. And it's sort of like a didactic diagram to explain, you know, what the work is about. But, you know, because at that time I've been teaching for a while now. And then it kind of struck me that a lot of my students are so scared to talk about their work. It's as if they talk about their work, the artwork is going to lose all sort of mystery. And so in a way, it's sort of like a joke on my student. Like, look, I'm going to tell you everything about this work, but I'm still really confident the sculpture is going to speak for itself. You know, it's like it's just going to add more layers to your experience and your interpretation of it. It's not going to take away the mystery of the object or the phenomenological experience of the sculpture. So don't worry about it. And for this, what happened in this piece is that after doing some major shows, I was actually feeling fatigue. I had a burnout, and it's very common when you, as an artist working for a while, you have artist block, and you know, one day I totally ran out of idea. I had no idea what the hell I'm gonna do next. So I feel very tired, and I need energy. And the idea, like, wait, Shirley, you need energy, you need power. Why don't you just build a power plant? So it's just, like language always in my head, just like the idea of literally turning this idea into sculpture excites me. And that's it. It just happened like that. I said, okay, I'm just going to build some power towers. I build a power plant in my studio because I need energy. But at that time, I was not sure how is it going to relate to my practice of using plastic because, the materials is HDPE is plastic, but the idea of power plant, what does it has to do with packaging, styrofoam, then, signify globalization, whatnot. But I went ahead because I trust my intuition. And sure enough, when I start doing research on energy production and electricity transmission, I discovered that the advent of large-scale electricity was not possible until they invented synthetic plastic or rubber as insulation. Because in the early days, they used copper wire, and it will lose heat after a certain distance. It won't travel very far, and also it's a fire hazard. So, and then the silly putty was actually a byproduct in the chemical experiments trying to come up with that synthetic rubber. So it's all connected. And then, of course, when I'm doing more research, I also find out that for people who live near power plant, you're actually more prone to depression because of your exposure to EMF, the electromagnetic frequency. So it kind of comes full circle. So I try to get out of my own depression by making power towers. But if there were real power towers, then I would get depressed again, I guess. So, and in the same show, sort of sister piece to power tower, I have this installation called Intermission. And it's an interlocking booth. There are about 6 of them, and in each booth there is a sculpture. And the sculpture is named after a site or place that has significance to me personally. And this booth is actually, the gallery had 2 spaces, and I was going to put one installation in each space, but I decided not to use the second space, left it empty, but instead I would put Intermission into the dealer office. And I just kind of shoved it into the back room. So, creating some degree of inconvenience for them. And I did that because it was around 2004, which is the year when US has a presidential election. So the idea of a polling booth was kind of curious to me. Like, what is a polling booth? It's kind of like public and private at the same time. And then because of the proliferation of art fair, we show art in a booth, which is really strange. And then when I think about booth, I think about the bathroom stalls. So all this kind of public-private things come together. And then the back room of a gallery is that sort of liminal space in between. So, as a visitor, you're not really invited to go into the back room because they do their deal there. If you're not invited, you shouldn't go there. But since the exhibition continue into the anteroom, so you're invited to go. So, so that is my way of transgressing that system. And here's a view. And this piece, the fan is called Chinatown. And this is called Tahiti. And this is called New York. There's a detail of New York. And this is called Beijing. Detail of Beijing. Detail of Beijing. And this is called Rome. And it's like, this is really dating me because I'm still using a DVD player. With, a DVD player with a video running in the styrofoam beads in a way, but then the actual video is a bunch of trash, basically. These are plastic bottles being trapped in a waterway in Rome, so it's titled Rome. And then we're moving on to 2005. This photographic series called Waiting at the Place Where America Apart from Eurasia. And after Power Towers, I was doing research on energy production. I was struck by the image of people bathing in a lagoon next to a power plant. In my mind, someone who lives in a city that heavily dependent on fossil fuel, I thought, I made an assumption of all power plant pollute the immediate environment. Little did I know that geothermal power exists where the image is from. So that image of people bathing in front of the power plant was actually from Iceland. So Iceland sits squarely on the mid-Atlantic ridge, is being split apart as the North American plate is drifting away from the Eurasia plate. I know that I must go there and make this work because it was in 2004, shortly after George Bush was re-elected, which prolonged the era of surveillance and unjustified invasion of oil-rich region. So I thought the metaphor of plate tectonic is apt. In fact, the drifting is both a metaphor and an actual event of United States moving away from its European allies, isolating itself, going alone. So, and you see there is a sculpture that made of foam, that sort of beige tone foam, and it's just sitting there waiting, so we have to wait another 4 years for another election. And you can see the trim of the photograph is made of the same material. So this, again, there's no mystery to what the material is, because, well, you're not allowed to touch it, but at least you can see very closely what the bench is made of. So in the interest of time, I'm going to move forward this pretty quickly. And after doing the research on power, energy, I realized that plastic is a petroleum-derived substance. So it's linked to the oil industry, and the military action can no longer be ignored by me simply because I'm using plastic. So in this exhibition, I want to focus on the use of ancient and modern militaristic objects. So I want to address the use of plastic in these things in 3 different ways. The first one is literal. So I will incorporate objects that, plastic that's used in a submarine. And this is called Sink Like a Submarine. And I was given some factory reject part for a submarine, which is what you see, this sort of square block. And they found object. And to my eyes, they look like jade. And the next thing I know, I want to cast some ancient sword form in resin to mimic that resin that look like jade color. But then in the middle of the sculpture, I came back to Hong Kong and I went to Guangdong-do. And then I have a jade carver carve a heart organ for me, and I placed in the middle of the sculpture. And then this is a sister piece, and I'm just gonna skip through it. And then the second way I use militaristic object is representational. So quite a few pieces trying to reference tank tire, and this is one of them. And then you can see the mini globe, and one of the mini globes is actually not a mini globe, but a world map that sort of crumbled into this ball form. And this is another more abstract rendition of a tank tire that sort of wrap around this thing. And then this carving of a little tank in there. And I really like the way that the factory dimension come back again, because when you buy fabric in a roll, they only come in 36, 58, 56, and then 96. So these are standardized dimension. I didn't alter them. All I do is slice them into, and then I wrap them up. And here is the third way in which I address military technology. When you think about the most recent technology, is no longer objects, it's information. Information is the newest weapon. And then the computer is actually inspired by the loom, if you know. It's by a Jacquard loom that is the first programmable loom that has a punch card. And And here it is. And then I'm just going to quickly, I guess we're running out of time, so I want to quickly show you this series called Quantum Shirley. And because I'm doing all the research and reading all the story, I find that narrative to be incredibly plastic. All the stories somehow bending, converging together, depending on who is telling the story and to whom the so-called reality can be totally different. You have to negotiate between the different version of the story you hear to get a grasp of what you are willing to believe. So now I'm up to the idea of how do you negotiate of what story to believe in, what kind of reality. And the idea of quantum physics is really interesting because according to quantum physics, when a card falls, it actually falls on both sides. It's called a collapse of the wave function. The fact is that because you are perceiving one side, so that close off the other side. You just have no access to the other side anymore. And in this series, I weave together my personal story, new physics, the trade movement of colonial products as in rubber and vanilla, which has relations to my family history who worked in rubber plantation and vanilla plantation in the southern China Sea, and the geographical displacement of Chinese in the last century. And here's a few images. And some under this series is not to be taken so literally, and sometimes I use the concept of translation, and in this case, it's from square to a globe, and so forth. And here is a performance under, a lecture performance under Quantum Shirley, and then you see how I'm emphasizing the connection between different things. And that's part of the lecture performance. And this is my most recent solo show called Lift Me Up So I Can See You Better. And again, this is an exhibition that I have converging 3 or 4 different things together by combining the story of Oscar Wilde, Happy Prince, and also I was given a glass chunk by a deceased artist, and the fact that I've been recently diagnosed with glaucoma, so I've been studying the eyeballs a lot. And in Oscar Wilde's story, when I'm reading it as an adult again, it's no longer the ruby stone, the precious stone that's caught my eye, but the idea of being high up. So the prince didn't know what's going on in his town until he became a statue high up, so that once he's high up, he's able to see the mystery of his own people. So the idea of being in a higher perspective gives you new understanding of relations with people is really important too. That was my interpretation of the work. And so I put most of the sculpture on some form of stand, and sometimes is, C-stand and whatnot, but sometimes it's a natural stand that's in bamboo. And this is called income inequality, so a crumbled piece of paper being held together by genuine 24K gold chain. Because, Happy Prince also addressed the idea of income inequality, and combining styrofoam and jade in this case. And this is called optic nerve. And it's sort of an abstract diagram of optic nerve in an eyeball. And then, if you remember from the first slide, so I also set up the so-called subject-object relations coming back now. So this is spectator stand, but the sculpture is occupying the spectator stand. And if you are being the spectator when you walk into this space, like, where are you going to sit? Who are you? If the sculpture is already looking at the other sculpture, and who are you? You are looking at sculpture, looking at sculpture. So I guess I will end here.